In this lecture, we'll look at the other half of the market, suppliers, and then at the interaction of supply and demand that results in market prices. In the second lecture for Lesson 4, we'll look at the role of competition as we complete our overview of markets in action. Suppliers, like demanders, are subject to market institutions' rules of the game and the powerful incentive of price. Now, your students have spent their whole lives as consumers, but most have no or very little experience as suppliers, so expect them to have a little harder time predicting the behavior of sellers in the market. Again, the click digital picture of a frozen moment in time can be a helpful teaching tool. This time, my picture is going to be a chart of supply, a supply schedule, for the production of firewood. I tell my students a story about living in the foothills of Denver and heating my house with a wood-burning stove. I explain that the big pile of logs I accumulated over the summer needs to be cut into stove lengths, split, and stacked outside the door in preparation for the winter. I ask who would be willing to produce firewood for me and call on several students who raise their hands. So far, this is the same process we used when we made the demand schedule, except that now I'm asking them to tell me how much they're willing to produce and sell at different prices. You can think of this either as them supplying their labor or supplying a product, split and stacked firewood, that they produce by using the labor resource that they own. My first taker is Tom. He's small and wiry and working to get in shape for the upcoming wrestling season, hoping to repeat his championship performance of last year. Tom, it turns out, is pretty cheap labor. And you can bet that the rest of the kids in the class are razzing him as he gives me his answers. Now, egged on by the other girls, Jennifer volunteers, but she makes it very clear that she is not going to get sore and sweaty for peanuts. She does, however, want badly to go on the senior ski trip over winter break. So at $6 an hour, she gives in, and at $30 an hour, I pretty much own her time. She's willing to give up sleep and skip school. Well, maybe that's not a good thing. Last is Brandon, football team captain and somewhat iffy econ student. Why do I get the feeling that he's really doing this in the hopes that I'll be kind when I fill out the academic eligibility form he hands me each week? Anyway, we have a chart picture of 3 individuals' willingness to supply firewood. Different kids, different situations, different willingness to supply. But there's a pattern, isn't there? A relationship between price and the quantity each student is willing to sell me, which we've labeled QS, or quantity supplied. And it seems to be the opposite of the relationship between price and quantity demanded. Let's look at it another way. As with demand, we can also paint this supply picture on a graph. Same setup as our demand graph. Price on the vertical axis, quantity on the horizontal axis. But this time, it's quantity supplied, not quantity demanded. Instead of showing how much consumers are willing to buy at various prices, this graph picture is showing us how much producers are willing to offer for sale at various prices. So here they are, Tom's, Jennifer's, Brandon's supply pictures, or supply curves. Just as the relationship between their hourly wage and the amount of time they'd work was similar, their supply curves are similar. They all slope upward to the right. So, as with demand, we have 2 kinds of pictures, the chart, or supply schedule, and the supply curve, or supply graph. So let's make sure that our 2 pictures match. Here are 2 points on Jennifer's graph picture. If we check the axes, it says that she's not willing to supply anything until the price is at least $6 an hour. And it says that at a price of $9 an hour, she's willing to supply 5 hours of firewood cutting. Look at the chart. Is that what she told us? Yep. So generalize. What's the relationship between price and quantity supplied? Right. Higher prices motivate you to supply more. The chart and the graph are telling us the same thing. And when you think about it, it makes sense that people would supply more if they are paid a higher price for doing so. Remember that just like there's an opportunity cost to buying something, there's an opportunity cost to producing something. And prices are the incentives that convince producers to bear those opportunity costs. For the firewood producers in our example, it's the value of other things they could do with their time. The higher the price, the more willing they are to give up those other opportunities and bear the cost of producing. Remember our example from the In the Chips activity? If the seller had valuable alternatives, it took a higher price to get him to produce computer chips. The law of supply captures this relationship. As the price increases, quantity supplied increases, and as the price goes down, quantity supplied decreases. What causes the change in quantity supplied? Right, changes in price. Think price effect. Now, because of their lack of experience in the producer role, students have a harder time understanding supply, and the value of an example like the firewood is that they can personally identify with the situation. But that example also lets us see a common misconception. Students often reason that suppliers will supply more at lower prices because they need to get a certain amount of money. Remember Jennifer, who was working to earn money for a ski trip? Students' faulty logic is that if I pay her a high price for her labor, she won't have to work as long to get to her goal amount. You can see the intuitive appeal, and we certainly can't argue that no individuals ever act this way, but it's not the general reaction of suppliers to changes in price. So if this issue comes up, go back to the firewood example and ask whether they're willing to do more or less physical labor at low pay. In fact, ask Jennifer if she'd quit working at $30 an hour even after she'd earned enough money for the ski trip. Her supply schedule tells us that even though she'd only need to work 5 hours to pay for the trip, at a price of $30 an hour, she'd be willing to work 14 hours. Here are some other questions that you can ask to help students understand that higher wages act as an incentive for people to work more, not less. Higher prices act as an incentive for people to produce more, not less. Like the law of demand, the incentive that underpins the law of supply is price, and the mechanism that makes it work is substitution. Suppliers can substitute too. Firewood cutters can substitute lawn mowing or working at the local fast food restaurant. Night shift grocery shelf stockers can substitute by quitting in order to cut firewood. The examples are easy to see when talking about selling our labor, but it's also true for supplying products. Hamburger sellers can easily switch to making chicken sandwiches. Auto manufacturers can substitute by making airplanes or tanks. We're not saying it's always easy to substitute, but at some price, substitutions can be made. Witness the experience of our country's automakers in World War I and II. Okay, back to our snapshot picture of supply. Click. Ceteris paribus applies to the law of supply as well as to the law of demand. It says that all else being equal, that is, freeze the conditions that exist at this moment, and then increases in price will increase the quantity supplied, and decreases in price will reduce the quantity supplied. But what if something else changes, as it invariably does in the real world? Right, click. It's a new picture. What if I purchase a mechanical log splitter? Click. That changes the picture significantly, doesn't it? Tom's willingness to supply falls because he's not getting as much of a workout. Brandon's rises because now he's not so tired for football practice. And it doesn't matter to Jennifer. For her, it's just a matter of the time she gives up, not the nature of the work she does during that time. So now let's picture these changes on a graph. Which direction is a decrease in supply? Hint, which direction is the zero on the quantity axis? Correct. Tom's supply curve moved to the left. Now, brief teacher interjection here. Notice how using the terms up and down to describe movement of the supply curve can really create problems. Tom's supply curve appears to have shifted up when his willingness to supply decreased. Very confusing. You can get away with using up and down on the demand curve, but it's asking for trouble because sooner or later you're going to get to the supply curve. So my advice, don't even do it in the beginning. Use right and left when you talk about shifting the curves. If reduction in supply moves the curve to the left, then it's logical that Brandon's increased willingness to supply shifts the curve to the right. Remember that these supply shifters are the non-price determinants of supply. The law of supply told us about how price changes the quantity supplied, but this isn't about the price effect. It's about other factors that change the quantity supplied at all prices. It's click a new picture. Now, here are the usual suspects when it comes to supply shifters. Your textbook may name or categorize them differently, but it's just wording rather than conceptual differences. First is cost of production. That's the biggie and is pretty obvious. If the minimum wage goes up or you find a cheaper supplier of raw materials, it's clearly going to change the supplier's willingness to produce because it affects his profits. Now, suppliers, remember, don't have control over the price of their products, so they have to focus on trying to control their production costs. Numbers of suppliers. We don't often think about that. If a second pizza restaurant opens in a town that only has one, it doesn't mean that the first restaurant will only make half as many because they now have to split with the new restaurant. No, more pizzas will be supplied. Prices of substitutes. We mentioned earlier that producers can substitute and make something different. What would motivate them to do so? Right, profit. If the price of a product is rising, producers pay attention because it may mean that more profit is available. Remember, it's the market that sets the price. If a producer notices that chicken sandwiches are selling for a higher price in the market than hamburgers, and he can make both for about the same cost, he'll substitute and use his resources to produce more chicken sandwiches and fewer hamburgers. And finally, like demand, supply is influenced by expectations of the future. If resource prices are expected to rise, producers may cut back, worrying that production costs will rise and profits will fall. Okay, so these determinants of supply are also called supply shifters. Keep in mind that they're different from the price effect, and thus they're not described by the law of supply. And with this list in mind, let's try a few examples. What happens to the supply of hot dogs if the price of hot dog buns increases? You ready? The supply will decrease. Why? Because the hot dog vendor has increased production costs, the price of buns. With less profit, he's less willing to supply the product. Some vendors may go out of business. Some may switch to pretzels. We don't know why there will be less supplied. We just know that there will be. Here's another. We know that technology can reduce production costs, so that should increase supply, right? Well, not necessarily. It might depend on whether the technology is available or just expected. If the producers fear that future technology is set to make their current product obsolete, they may reduce production in anticipation. I mean, after all, warehouses full of products you can't sell aren't good for profits. Thus, it's their expectations that cause the supply to fall. Okay, what happens to the supply of firewood when my income goes up and I'm willing to pay more? Did I get you? Nothing happened to the supply, nothing. My income is not a determinant of supply. Did you see it anywhere on the list of supply shifters? No, because it's a determinant of demand, as we learned in the last lesson. If you assume that my higher income means I'd be willing to pay more, you can tell me the impact on the quantity of firewood that would be sold and purchased, but you can't tell me the supply changed. Remember when we investigated? Their supply schedules and curves already tell me what happens. the quantity supplied increases, but the supply schedule itself doesn't change. In graph terms, the quantity at all prices is already shown in the supply curve. Okay, so now you're on the alert for the tricky questions. Let's try another one. What happens to the supply of pizzas if people begin to eat more pizza because the Surgeon General says it's good for your health? Okay. Assume that people actually believe the Surgeon General. Did I get you again? I hope not, because the answer is, again, repeat after me, nothing happens to supply. The quantity supplied increases, but the supply doesn't. This is a really common error, and if you've taught economics for any time at all, you've run into it. Students will tell you that supply increased because demand increased, or some other rendition of demand and supply cause each other. There's some truth to that in the long run. I mean, producers do make what consumers are willing to buy, but as an explanation for the everyday dynamics of markets, it's not a helpful way to think. So look back at the pizza problem and ask a series of questions to sort it out. First question, is this change a price effect? In other words, did the price of pizza change? The answer is yes. So this is a law of supply question. Here's how it works. As people go out to buy more pizza because of the Surgeon General's report, the price of pizza in the market rises. And according to the law of supply, when the price of that product rises, what happens to the quantity that the pizza producers will provide for sale? Well, we already know that because we asked them how many they'd produce at different prices when we made the supply schedule or the supply curve. They will produce and sell more at a higher price. Okay, but suppose you answered question number 1 wrong, or you didn't know the answer. So let's go to question 2. Ask yourself, what changed in this situation? And the answer is, people are eating more pizza because of the Surgeon General's report. Okay, so question 3, is that a change in supply or a change in demand? Aha, it's a change in demand. And the question asks, what happened to supply? Demand shifters don't shift supply, they shift demand. And an increase in demand, when everything else stays the same, causes an increase in price. So now we can go back to question number 1. Is this a price effect? Yes. And the law of supply tells us that in any supply picture we're working with, if the price goes up, the quantity supplied will increase. But the supply picture itself doesn't change. There weren't any supply shifters in this story. Supply and demand curves or supply and demand schedules give us pictures of how buyers and sellers behave in response to prices and to changing conditions in the market. And, very importantly, they also help us understand what happens when buyers and sellers interact with each other to generate prices and create the market equilibrium that's our greatest weapon against scarcity. As you work with students on these problems, don't forget the power of the experience they had within the chips. They saw a market equilibrium emerge from their own unscripted interactions. That's just another picture of how a market works. We didn't draw charts or graphs first, we just created a market and let it work. No one knew what other people's demand or supply schedules and curves looked like, and no one was in charge, but it all worked just fine and both buyers and sellers benefited. The debriefing process helped them recognize what they experienced. The negotiation process between buyers and sellers that organized the market and moved prices into a relatively small range, and the increasing numbers of transactions that took place as this market organized itself. Build on this experience as you take them the next step in the analysis, which is putting supply and demand pictures together to model the interaction they experienced in the chips market and in the markets they take part in every day. We model the interaction between suppliers and demanders that allows markets to work by overlaying our supply and demand schedules or by putting our supply and demand pictures on the same graph. The point at which the curves intersect is the equilibrium point, and from that point we can read first the equilibrium price, and next the equilibrium quantity. Notice that equilibrium point. It's in both the supply picture and the demand picture. So the quantity, indicated down on the horizontal axis, is both the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded. A very slick trick in the world of scarcity. The definition of an equilibrium price is that it's the price that makes the amount that consumers want to buy equal the amount that producers want to sell. In other words, it's the point at which quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. Now notice something here. We define the equilibrium price not by what it is, but by what it does. It clears the market. In fact, you may actually have a textbook that refers to the equilibrium at the market as the market clearing price. That's the magic of markets, that rationing by price means that there's enough for everyone willing to pay, and very importantly, that there's none left over, no waste of resources that could have been used in other valued ways. That's a great advantage in a world of unlimited wants and limited resources. The other great advantage of market institutions is that they're very dynamic, flexible, and adaptable. As conditions change, market prices transmit information about those changes to suppliers and demanders, and they in turn adjust in response to the price incentives. The supply and demand graph allows us to model and analyze those changes, but it shouldn't blind us to the many different ways this story can be told. On your screen and in the assignment that accompanies this lesson is a link that tells the story of market equilibrium in a video clip. If you're like me, when you watch this scene, you'll be struck again by how well the market rules of the game work and how little attention we actually have to pay them. So let's take a break here. Watch the video clip from the Hudsucker proxy and start on the assignment problems if you'd like to. Then return for the second part of Lecture 2, where we'll look at specific examples of markets in action.